Warning, the following video will contain content unsettling for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. If you're still here, you have been warned. Enjoy the video. Hello everyone, it's me Eric the Trainmaster 611 bringing you another video, and for this video I'm going to be doing a review. Now, I'm sure you all know that the 22nd anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks is coming up, and for that, I'm going to be doing a review on a documentary series called 9/11: One Day in America. So without further ado, let's dive right in. 9/11: One Day in America is a 6-episode documentary miniseries produced by National Geographic. It documents the events of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks and was aired between August 29th and September 1st, 2021, which is around the 20th anniversary of the attacks. It contains 6 episodes that tell the events of that day from when the first plane hit the World Trade Center to when the last survivors were rescued from the rubble through the eyes of witnesses, survivors who were also interviewed, and contains footage that was never seen before or rare to find. Production of the series started in May 2020 after National Geographic announced that it would be doing a documentary series of the events for the 20th anniversary. It was also made in collaboration with the 9/11 Memorial and Museum and was also made by 72 Films. In making this program, the producers made it as a documentary miniseries not to have a narrator, but to be one to showcase what happened on that day and to be quote-unquote told in full by those who survived and in chronological order. Also, some of these people haven't been interviewed in 9/11 documentaries before. So for my review of the series, I will be talking about the plot of the entire series itself, explain my thoughts on them, and then I will determine whether the series was good, meh, or bad. So, without further ado, let's go. So 9/11: One Day in America has 6 episodes, which are First Response, The South Tower, Collapse, The Cloud, I'm Coming for You Brother, and It's All Gone Kid. So the series starts with the first episode, First Response. The episode starts with the New Yorkers starting their day, and among them include businessman Ron Clifford, production chef Kevin Lurie, who worked at the Marriott World Trade Center, and Fire Department Battalion Chief Joseph Pfeiffer. As they are going about their daily work, at 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 flies over New York City and crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Then after the crash, Pfeiffer and the firefighters start heading to the scene, and also during the episode, we hear re-recordings of phone calls and air traffic control recordings, involving the hijacked planes, and also from the World Trade Center. Also, one of these phone calls was from a person who was in the World Trade Center named Paul Battaglia. He was at the top of the North Tower above the impact zone. In fact, this is the first time I heard that call, and honestly, it was really chilling and shocking. Not to mention, this call was made public a few years prior. In the aftermath of the first crash, people and witnesses gather on the scene and watch in terror and confusion as black smoke billows out of the North Tower. Among them is Ron Clifford, who was in the lobby of the hotel of the World Trade Center complex, Marriott World Trade Center. Now, as he comes out to see the commotion, he encounters this badly burned woman named Jenny Ann McPhail, and he attempts to aid her. Then while all this is going on, at 9:03 a.m., another plane, United Airlines Flight 175, hits the South Tower, the North Tower's twin. After initially thinking the first crash was an accident, America now knows without doubt it is a terrorist attack. As the evacuation efforts are going on, people and firefighters in the lobby of the North Tower hear loud thuds coming outside. This is the result of people being trapped on the upper floors as a result of the plane's impact destroying the building's 3 staircases and elevators, leaving those with no way out, jumping or falling to their deaths. Meanwhile, Ron Clifford and others managed to get Jenny Ann to an ambulance that would take her to the hospital. Sadly, Jenny Ann would not make it, as she would die from her burns a few weeks later. Also, Ron Clifford also lost 2 family members on 9/11, his sister Ruth and young niece Juliana. They were on board United Airlines Flight 175, which was one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center, and he learned about what happened to them that afternoon from his brother-in-law, David, who was his sister Ruth's husband. And at the last part of the episode, we hear from a survivor of the World Trade Center, Lynn Simpson, how two men rescued her and her colleagues on the 89th floor of the North Tower. Those men turned out to be architects and Port Authority employees Frank DiMartini and Pablo Ortiz, who died while helping people evacuate the North Tower. Lynn describes them as quote-unquote good, brave souls and true heroes, considering they saved more than 70 people that day. Then the first episode ends there, and we move on to the next episode, the South Tower. In the South Tower, we see events that unfold in the second World Trade Center building, the South Tower. After the first plane hit, some of the South Tower's occupants decide to evacuate the building as a precaution. Among those trying to evacuate is Stanley Pramath, an employee for Fuji Bank who works on the 81st floor. When he and many others get to the lobby area, building staff announce that the building is safe and they should return to their office. Initially hesitant, Pramath eventually changes his mind and takes the elevator up to his floor on 81. When he returns to his office, he catches sight of a plane coming towards him. As the plane comes towards him, knowing that it will hit his building and with very little time to react, at the last second, he dives under his desk. Then, at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 crashes into the South Tower almost 20 minutes after the North Tower was struck. Although he survives, Pramath finds his office covered with debris and is unable to escape on his own. At the same time, Eurobroker's employee, Brian Clark, is making his way down the stairs from the 84th floor, but is stopped by two other people trying to tell him to go upstairs because of the smoke, but insists on going down. In the middle of the debate, Clark hears shouts for help coming from the 81st floor, which happens to be coming from Stanley Pramath. He goes inside Pramath's office and manages to help him climb over some debris to safety. After the rescue, Brian and Stanley make their way down the stairs and get out of the building. Another survivor in the South Tower who tells her own story is Kathy Comerford, an executive director for company Morgan Stanley, who was working on the 70th floor on 9/11. After the buildings are hit, she makes her way down the stairs and is also joined by other Morgan Stanley employees. And here comes one of the best well-known hero stories of 9/11. As Kathy reaches the 44th floor, she hears a male voice singing songs and saying, "Today is a proud day to be an American." That person was Rick Rescola, the head of security of Morgan Stanley. As head of security, Rick was in charge of the security and safety of the Morgan Stanley employees in the World Trade Center. He was even the person who predicted a terrorist attack on the World Trade Center, and after American Airlines Flight 11 hit the North Tower, Rick knew it was a terrorist attack and began evacuating civilians from the South Tower and was still doing so when United Flight 175 hit the building. Not to mention, he evacuated civilians from the World Trade Center when it was bombed in 1983 and quote-unquote predicted that terrorists would strike again from the air. After getting down to the lobby, Kathy exits the building and heads for the streets crowded with people and emergency service personnel. She describes that some of her colleagues, quote, recalled encountering Rick Rescola heading up and urged him to come down, but Rick stated he would after making sure everyone was out of the building, end quote. Then, at 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapses after burning for 56 minutes. Kathy Comerford, along with Brian Clark and Stanley Pramath, made it out of the building before it came down. But others were not so lucky. Rick Rescola and his security team members were still inside the South Tower when it collapsed. None of them survived, but their actions helped save more than 2,000 lives. The last part of the episode showcases New York Fire Department firefighter Jay Jonas, the captain of Ladder Company 6, describing witnessing the South Tower collapse while he and his men are in the North Tower climbing the stairs. After watching it collapse, he and his men start heading down the stairs, fearing the North Tower would also collapse, which serves as a prelude of what's going to happen in the next episode. We then move on to our next episode, Collapse. In this episode, everyone all across New York and the nation are watching the attacks in New York live on TV, but there's worse to come. At 9:37 a.m., 200 miles from New York City in Washington, D.C., another plane, American Airlines Flight 77, crashes into the Pentagon, the headquarters of the United States military, which is on the outskirts of Washington. Now it is not just New York that is under attack, but the nation's capital is too. Back in New York, as news of the Pentagon attack breaches the radios and TV stations, people watch in shock as the South Tower collapses, leaving a choky, powdery dust cloud covering lower Manhattan. In the aftermath of the collapse, people try to get away from the disaster scene and to safety. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, while the evacuation efforts are underway, officials receive word that another plane is heading towards D.C. and the Pentagon and clear the area. Federal office buildings in Washington are also evacuated, and military fighter jets are sent to fly over D.C. Flying in an F-16 jet is fighter pilot Heather Penny. She describes that she and her fellow pilot Mark Sassville were to intercept the plane that was believed to be heading towards Washington, D.C. She describes that they, quote-unquote, didn't have enough time to load the planes with necessary equipment, would have no choice but to take it down by ramming it. Unfortunately, they were never able to intercept the plane, which was none other than United Airlines Flight 93, the final plane hijacked that day. We are then told of the events of United 93 by Alice Hoagland, who was the mother of United 93 passenger Mark Bingham. She describes that after Mark's plane was hijacked, he called his family members, including her about the hijacking before the call was cut off. Then, after watching live footage of the World Trade Center towers on fire, they realized that Mark was, quote-unquote, part of a much bigger situation. So Alice ended up leaving Mark a voicemail message encouraging her son to take action and take the plane from and overpower the hijackers. Later, after news officials start receiving word about a plane crash in Pennsylvania, they broadcast the news. The plane that crashed in Pennsylvania was United 93. It crashed into a field near the town of Shanksville, Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh and 125 miles northwest of Washington, D.C., just after 10 a.m. Flight 93 was intended to crash into a target in Washington, which was later determined to be the United States Capitol building, but crashed in the Pennsylvania field after the hijackers were overpowered by a group of passengers, including Mark Bingham, Tom Burnett, Todd Beamer, and Jeremy Glick. In doing so, while the fight cost their lives, they saved numerous lives in Washington, and Flight 93 never reached the terrorists' intended target. Good. This concludes the episode and brings us to the halfway point of the series itself. We then move on to the fourth episode, The Cloud. Picking up where parts 2 and 3 left off, lower Manhattan is covered in a dust cloud created by the collapse of the South Tower. In the North Tower, civilians and rescue workers are trying to find their way to safety. Among them is FDNY Battalion Chief Joseph Pfeiffer and his firefighters. As they escape, they discover the body of Fire Department Chaplain Michael Judge, who died when flying debris from the South Tower collapse hit him, and they carry him out. Here's an interesting fact. Judge was the first certified victim who died on 9/11. Even though others died before him, that being the people in the Twin Towers, the planes that crashed into the towers, and the Pentagon, as well as in the Pentagon, he was the first certified victim of the attacks as his body was the first one to be discovered. Once they make it out of the North Tower and through the World Financial Center to West Street, Pfeiffer and his men end up regrouping in front of the North Tower. Minutes later, at 10:28 a.m., the North Tower collapses 102 minutes after being hit. Upon watching the building collapse, Pfeiffer, Jules Naudet, who was best known for filming the entire firefighter evacuation operation in the North Tower, and others run for cover. In the aftermath of the collapse, and after having a moment of silence for losing so many people, Pfeiffer and his fellow firefighters begin with the rescue efforts. Also, there is another survivor story from the Marriott World Trade Center. On 9/11, lawyer Frank Rosano was staying in a room on the 19th floor as he was bound to attend a trial court case, which he describes it as a quote-unquote very big and important case. He was in his room when the towers were hit, hit, and fearing he may not get back into his room, he decided to leave. As he was preparing to leave his room, the hotel was partly destroyed when the South Tower collapsed as falling debris cut it in half. Frank manages to leave his room and make his way down the stairwell to the third floor, where he encounters a few more people trapped, including firefighter Jeff Johnson, as a result of the stairwell having collapsed. After the North Tower collapses, they crawl out of the debris and manage to make it to the ground out of the remains of the hotel. Frank then takes a ferry to Ellis Island, where a triage center is being set up, and it is the first time that he realizes what has happened to the World Trade Center after seeing that the Twin Towers are gone. In April 2003, his daughter Catherine got married, and he invited Jeff Johnson, the firefighter who saved his life, to the wedding, which concludes the episode. We then move on to the fifth episode, I'm Coming for You, Brother. In this story, firefighter Jay Jonas, captain of Ladder Company 6, is trapped in the wreckage of the collapsed North Tower. With him are other members of Ladder 6 and a woman who they helped down during their descent named Josephine Harris. They are on the fourth floor, trapped in Stairwell B, one of the stairways in the building. Outside, rescue workers feared that nobody could have survived the collapse of the North Tower. But then they hear calls coming from the rubble and realize there are survivors trapped in the wreckage and need help. Jay Jonas is one of those who gives a call and gives his location to Cliff Staffner, another firefighter, and Staffner. Jay Jonas is one of those who gives a call and gives his location to Cliff Staffner, another firefighter, and Staffner responds by saying, quote unquote, I'm coming for you, brother. After several hours, Jonas's team, and Harris are rescued from the rubble. Also, another firefighter, John Morbido, is also reunited with his brother Michael, who he initially thought was dead after being missing in the collapse of the North Tower. They were also working in the fire department and were in the building but escaped before it came down. The episode ends with the aftermath of Jay Jonas and Josephine Harris's rescue and shows that they have been friends with each other ever since after journalists reunited them after tracking her down. Harris died in 2011, and the firefighters from Ladder 6 who rescued her attended her funeral as the pallbearers. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. The episode also ends with radio stations announcing that there are people alive in the wreckage of the World Trade Center, which serves as a prelude of what's going to happen in the last episode. In the last episode, titled It's All Gone, Kid, we witness one of the amazing rescue stories of that day as evening comes around. In the wreckage of the World Trade Center, there are some people buried alive under the rubble. Among them is Port Authority police officer William Jimeno. Jimeno and his fellow policemen were in the concourse of the World Trade Center when the South Tower collapsed. He and two others, Sergeant John McLaughlin and Dominic Pezzulu, who survived and became trapped under the rubble. Unfortunately, Pezzulu was fatally injured by falling debris from the collapse of the North Tower. After several hours of being trapped in the rubble, Jimeno and McLaughlin are found by former U.S. Marine Jason Thomas and another person named Chuck Siriaika. Jimeno is lifted out and taken to the hospital by midnight, and McLaughlin is lifted out the following morning. They were two of the 20 people who were rescued from the rubble. In the aftermath of the attacks, people start posting flyers with photos of loved ones who are lost. Among those who are fearing the loss of loved ones is Joseph Pfeiffer, who starts to fear that the possibility that his brother, Kevin, who was also a firefighter who worked for Engine Company 33, is gone. In February 2002, 5 months after 9/11, Pfeiffer was called to the cleanup site of the World Trade Center, where the body of his brother Kevin was found. The tagline then states that 2,977 people, or almost 3,000, died on September 11, 2001. We are then shown the 9/11 Memorial Museum and is run by Tom Canavan, who survived the attacks. He describes what the museum is like and that people come there and see the names and pictures of the people whose lives were lost. The episode ends with the people interviewed saying the names of people that died The episode ends with the people who were interviewed in the series saying the names of the people who died, who they were related to or were close to, with a beautiful piece of music playing. The series ends with a beautiful shot of the Twin Towers in between clouds with the sun rising in the sky, and thus brings the series to its conclusion. So, what are my thoughts on the episodes themselves? Well, I will say that all of them are fantastic and well told. They have a lot of action and graphic scenes that describe that day in full, and the never seen before footage was really cool but yet drastic to look at. The interviews that people make in each episode are well described and detailed. For my most favorite episode, that goes to First Response, as it is a great introduction to the series. For the one I like the least, it would be It's All Gone Kid, as don't get me wrong, I do love all the episodes in the series, but for me, some of the scenes and interviews in this episode tend to drag on or go on for too long a little bit. I will say my favorite parts of that episode are the scene when Jimena was rescued and the ending scene, which in my opinion is a beautiful yet bittersweet way to close out the series completely. For the ratings of the episodes, I give episodes 1, 2, 4, and 5 a 10 out of 10. I give episode 3 a 9 out of 10. And episode 6, I give 8.5 out of 10. For my ranking list, it goes like this. Now, what do I think of 9/11 One Day in America? Well, I will have to say that this is one of the most amazing documentaries of 9/11 I've ever seen. Out of the tons of 9/11 documentaries I've watched, like Heroes of the 88th Floor, Inside the Towers, and Phone Calls from the Towers, this has to be one of the most brilliant and well-made ones. The music, the interviews with survivors and people connected to the tragedy, and the never-seen-before footage makes this series worth watching. I will say, for a documentary series, National Geographic chose a brilliant one for the 20th anniversary, and I applaud the people who worked on this series for doing a fabulous job. However, there are some parts of the series that I felt could use some rework, like the ending of episode 3, as I felt could have had a more dramatic feel to it, as having some people being interviewed during the attacks, like what was shown on TV Newsworks. Also, the collapse of the South Tower is shown twice, and I will admit it did seem a little unnecessary to show it twice, but I can understand why they did that, as they wanted to show what the survivors of the South Tower went through as it collapsed, and also show what happened to Rick Rescola, so I'll give the team slack for that, as it does serve as a prelude of what's going to happen in the next episodes. Also, for the episode Collapse, I would change the title of it, as it didn't just focus on the collapse of the South Tower, but it also focused on the events of the Pentagon and Flight 93. So in my opinion, I would have had the episode titled Collapse, the Pentagon, and Flight 93. But those nitpicks definitely don't ruin the pleasure of watching the series as a whole. Also, I do wish some of the unseen footage does come to light on YouTube and other media sources as well. So in conclusion, I give 9/11 One Day in America a 10 out of 10 for an excellent series. This is one of my most favorite 9/11 documentaries, and probably might be my favorite as my years on Earth go on. For anyone who hasn't seen this documentary series, I highly recommend giving it a watch, but please watch with caution, as it does contain content that may be unsettling for some. Guys, that concludes my review of 9/11 One Day in America. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to give the video a like, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content. And also, if this review does very well, then I'll probably do more reviews on movies or TV shows that I have not yet covered. So guys, this is Eric the Trainmaster 611 signing off. Thank you for watching this review of 9/11 One Day in America, and I'll see you guys real soon. Peace.